So let's talk about the best fights from 2025. This is my personal selection. I think there's been some great boxing moments this year. So let's reflect, let's give perspective, and be grateful that these warriors have put it on the line. Now, boxing, of course, is entertainment. Boxing, of course, is capitalism. But boxing is also a sweet science. Let's begin. So with regards to my favourite fights of 2025, you have to put Bivol Beterbiev 2 as one of those fights. And it's important to acknowledge the context of this fight. One of the major contexts of this fight was how much of a dominant champion Beterbiev was and how he was destroying people. And there's two British references here that I can think of the top of my head, which is the Anthony Yarde fight and the Callum Smith performance. Anthony Yarde, in fairness, put up a lot of resistance, but eventually was beaten. But the Callum Smith performance was chilling. It was a destruction of a good champion. I remember Callum Smith when he fought George Groves, and he was sensational that night. I don't ever think he's recaptured that form, but I was expecting a competitive fight, and Beterbiev simply just walked through him. And the one thing about Beterbiev is that he could throw short punches, like arm punches, but they would have devastating effects. So this was a boxer with elite level power. And when they fought in the first fight, it was a draw. When they fought in the first fight, I think, was it a draw or did Beterbiev get the fight? I can't remember. But what I remember was in the rematch, I think Beterbiev was given the decision. But in the rematch, Bivol actually started the fight not very well. And I remember in the middle of the fight, there was some concerns because it's like, well, Bivol needed a good start. And in that fight, it represented, you could break that fight into a few phases. The first phase is what I call the matrix mode. And that's when you just go to elite level of boxing, which is a combination of various things. So an effective jab, effective movement, and predominantly Bivol used leg movement. He used effective head placement. He had a really nice counter jab. He really punched through the phases. He didn't allow Beterbiev in the second half of the fight to take control, because every time Beterbiev tried to take the initiative, he would respond effectively. And that was so essential, and it was such a brave thing to do. So on a technical level, it was elite. It was elite. But then you had the other element, which is the psychology of Bivol. Like I said, Beterbiev, when he just throws arm punches, they hurt. They can knock out great fighters. Yet because of his psychology, his stoicism, his composure, he was able to maintain his calmness and implement his plan effectively. And when you look at a boxer, you may see their abs, you may see their biceps, you'll see their jab, you'll see their boxing intelligence or lack of boxing intelligence. But you don't necessarily see what's inside, which is, some would call it their spirit, their essence, their psychology, their resistance. And Bivol is not only technically brilliant, but he's also mentally very strong. And I really enjoyed that fight. What a great fight that was. And I take my hat off to both warriors because they both brought the pain. And it's like, for Bivol to accelerate to that matrix level, Beterbiev has to be such a dominant force. So that was one of my favorite fights of 2025. So another big fight that I really enjoyed, of course, was the Canelo Crawford fight. And I think for me, this fight, like I've stated, was not just a boxing match, it was a cultural event, meaning that not only were the boxing fans interested, the casual fans were interested. And this is evidenced by the fact that 41 million people watched the fight, and obviously Netflix put their engine behind it. Now, the business and the capitalism element of the fight was interesting. The build-up of the fight was interesting. The ambition from Crawford was interesting. But what really got me was that when the fight actually happened, it was Crawford's calmness, his boxing IQ, where he was able to nullify his opponent, nullify that vicious right hand that Canelo has. And he has a vicious right hook, a vicious left hook to the body, and he nullified that. And also the importance of round 9. And in round 9, I felt that Crawford actually asserted dominance. He went through the phases and he made a statement in that round, and that enabled him to control the pace, to control the distance. And I just thought there were so many elements to that fight, whether it was Crawford's poker face, his ring IQ, his control, and also the fact that he fought exclusively from the southpaw stance, because Crawford has the ability to fight southpaw or fight orthodox. And this was an awesome event, and it was an awesome fight, not because of the competitive nature of the fight or that there was swing moments. It was an awesome illustration of technical brilliance. Another fight I loved was Naoya Inoue versus Raymond. Now, I believe it was round 2, but Raymond, he landed this great left hook counter. And what was happening, Inoue was going through the gears. He was starting to throw a combination of punches. And Raymond just picked his moment. He landed the left hook counter and he hurt Inoue. He really hurt Inoue. And what did this do? Well, it showed that Raymond was a confident competitor, but he was a confident competitor with a plan. And that execution of that counter was absolutely meticulous. But Inoue came back, showing his character. As usual, or as custom, Inoue starts throwing the 1-2s, but he can throw them at the target, but sometimes he'll start throwing them through the target. This creates more counter opportunities, but it also increases the opportunity for Inoue to get the knockout or to hurt his opponent. And Inoue actually started to use the counter left hooks as well. And he had some success with the right hand over the jab. So there was like the 3 moves that I could see that were really effective for Inoue. And Inoue was punching with just such hard intentions. He was just punching with so much passion and intention, but not losing his shape. Now, I believe in round 7, there was a left hook to the body. Inoue threw that left hook to the body, and I think that had that really hurt Raymond. You know, that kind of took a lot of the fight out of him. And as fighters say, the body shots, when you've got the adrenaline, maybe you don't feel it at the time, but you definitely feel it afterwards. But I think Raymond really felt that shot. And then in round 8, the accumulation and the intensity of the punches from Inoue, it was just way too much. And he literally just punched through Raymond. And big respect to Raymond, because he really did bring resistance. And the lessons that we learned here was that Inoue, he can come back from disaster. You know, that was a good knockdown, and that was someone who was passionate. And we learned that Raymond was a warrior. You know, he was willing to put it on the line and to really give it his all. And even though Raymond had a good plan, even though he was a warrior, he could not deny the viciousness, the meticulous viciousness and ring IQ of Inoue. Of course, you have to mention the Chris Eubank Jr. Conor Benn 1. From a British perspective, this was the ultimate showdown. This was the ultimate showdown. And here's a question. Was Chris Eubank Jr.'s ring walk one of the greatest ring walks of all time? I mean, that was epic. And also the fight had one of the best build-ups. You know, you had the egg slaps, you had the confrontations, you had the inheritance of the father's rivalry, you had the rehydration clause, then you had the weight jump. It just had so many different chapters, and they were all organic as well. And effectively, you had this great marketing, but many fights have great marketing and then the fight is a letdown. But when they both got in the ring, you had 2 warriors putting it all on the line. And the passion from both fighters, from Chris Eubank Jr. and from Conor Benn, it was exceptional. They both were passionate and they brought everything to the table. And the last 2 rounds was just an absolute war. And it's commendable that, I know they got paid an awful lot amount of money, but just because you get paid a lot of money does not make you have character. It does not make you mentally strong. It does not make you a brave person. That was a choice. They honored their father's legacies. They put it all on the line, and they really went for it. And it was just such an amazing thing to see them both just give it their all. And I think both parties deserve respect. And I think, in hindsight, Chris Eubank Jr. left part of his soul in that ring. Arguably, they both did. But I think that fight took so much out of Chris Eubank Jr. But that will stay in the minds of people for many years to come. They literally created history. Yes, many people said they traded off their father's names, but look at the event that they put together. The marketing, the machine behind the fight was amazing, and you could argue that the fight excelled expectations, and that was a great fight. Now let me talk from the British perspective. Now, one of my favourite British fights was the Callum Smith versus Joshua Buatsi. Now, for me, my introduction to Callum Smith was his epic performance against George Groves. And in that fight, he had one of the best left hook counters that I've seen. He was just so phenomenal that night. His sharpness, his power, his speed, his control of distance, he was really effective. However, going into this fight, he's on arguably the later end of his career, and he had a dominating loss against Beterbiev. Now, granted, it was Beterbiev, but it was a loss, and it was a stoppage, and it was the first time, I believe, that Smith had ever been on the floor. So there was, concerns in terms of how competitive not necessarily how competitive could he be, but more about what does Callum Smith had left. And clearly he had a lot left. And what I really liked from Callum Smith is this fight. It wasn't just the jab, it was the work with the left hook. Now, Callum Smith, he throws the left hook short, and he had different variations of the left hook. Let me explain. So we would sometimes throw the left hook to the body and then the left hook to the head. That's a punch that Evander Holyfield used to throw. But then sometimes he would go left hook to the head and then left hook to the body. And then other times he might just double the left hook to the head or triple it to the head. So we had all these different variations of patterns with the left hook, which obviously makes it difficult to predict what he's going to do and makes it harder to block. Also, Callum Smith had, if I remember correctly, and I'm going off my memory here, he had a different trajectory with the right hand. So sometimes he would throw it short and sometimes he would throw it long. Again, when you throw the right hand short, it's easier to catch the counter. When you throw it long, it's easier to counter, but it can also create a knockout opportunity, or you give yourself more of a chance to hurt your opponent. So it's kind of like rolling the dice. And he would vary that right hand. And the variety of Callum Smith was really impressive. But Joshua Buatsi showed that he's a warrior. He's a real warrior. And in the 7th round, they went to war. And Joshua Buatsi took some really painful body shots. And fair play to him. He took the shots and he came back. And he set some traps in there. Joshua Buatsi, he was quite clever. He was setting traps. Callum Smith was setting traps. Both fighters, they showed ring IQ, they showed patience, they showed heart, they showed resilience. And basically, when you have two fighters that come to win, this is what happens. You have a great fight. And I believe that this was a really brutal affair, and it was really exciting to watch. I think also you have to include Manny Pacquiao's comeback against Barrios. Not that it was a great fight, but I think you have to include the comeback for me, because you've got to think of what Manny Pacquiao meant to the sport. For me, when I think of Manny Pacquiao, I think of the fighting, I think of the morality, I think of his character, I think about his humbleness. Specifically, I remember that the performance against Cotto, Miguel Cotto was a great fighter, and the way Manny Pacquiao respectively destroyed Cotto was elite level. It was on another level. And the way he battered Antonio Margarita, again, respectively, again, these were just elite level performances. And then obviously you had the performances against Ricky Hatton, against Oscar De La Hoya. Manny Pacquiao was just such a sensational fighter. He really was. And to see him in the ring, and to see him in the ring with Freddie Roach, Freddie Roach was his original trainer. It was the person, I believe, that discovered Manny Pacquiao and actually advanced him into being a boxing great. And to see them both together, and for Pacquiao to be at an advanced age, but to still perform at a world championship level, it was just a delight to see, because Manny Pacquiao means so much to boxing. Of course, he's a legend to boxing. Well, he's a legend to the Philippines. He's a legend to boxing, and he's a legend to the, to the world. And it was great to see him come back. And I know the fight was a draw, but many people thought he won that fight. So it was nice to see him come back and to be competitive, and just to see glimpses of that excellence.